I started physiotherapy in 1946. It was an intake of 30 students. 15 of them, I think, or thereabouts, were men and 15 women. This is the first full-size group of males in physiotherapy training in New Zealand. Prior to that, it had been 2s or 3s at the most, 4s perhaps. But this group were a returned servicemen, all except me. I was the baby of the boys, I think, really. I'd be in my early 20s, and they were returned servicemen. I remember one of the chaps, Jerry Joyce, saying to me, "Frank, I'm middle-aged today." So I congratulated him on being 35, I suppose it would be, if you work it out as 70 being that particular year. And anyway, he was about the same age as the group there. They would be all in their late 20s or their middle 30s. They were all returned servicemen, most of the services, and of course they took greatest delight where they could in having the tutor on about things, and particularly if a younger tutor was doing the teaching, and female, she really got questioned on all sorts of strange things. I can recall one particular thing, one of the men asking her during electrotherapy class how they got the wire into the rubber of the leads. Some silly things like this. But it was a joyous sort of a class, that one, I think. It was, I think, probably a positive thing that those men were there within physiotherapy at that time. I went into the school, I think it must have been before the new school had been entirely finished. We were in this new school from the beginning of that year. Inside, the walls hadn't been painted. There were still the concrete walls, plain concrete. Finished, certainly, but not painted. It was cold at times, but it was a pleasant place, and when we came to know that it was considered as being the best and most equipped physiotherapy department and school in the Southern Hemisphere, we were impressed. It had everything, I think. But the interesting thing probably was that most of the equipment and the systems there would have been pre-war, because the school had been decided upon and planned and literally paid for prior to the start of the war, but was never started until after the war had finished. And so we came into this marvellous building, this great place, and we were impressed, really, I think. But there was interesting things. I don't think at any particular stage during that year did the construction here and there continue. I can remember, I think my first patient was an elderly woman who had an OA knee and required shortwave diathermy and massage and exercises, I think, at that time. And I explained very carefully to this terrified old lady about what the shortwave would do and how it would be, and she was a bit scared of it because it was something very unusual to her, some strange thing to her, to be treated with electricity like this, and the way it was applying a field, applying great heat. She couldn't understand it. I did my best to explain, which probably wasn't very good at that time. And I switched the machine on, and at that particular moment there was a terrific roar of an electric drill in concrete right beside her. It was on the other side of the wall, certainly. And the poor woman nearly passed out at that point, and I did my best to gather her up, literally. But she went off home and didn't come back for treatment after that ever. I enjoyed the course, I think. Looking back on it, anatomy was pretty marvellous. I enjoyed the med school input, the dissection side of the thing. Trying to study anatomy that way was probably a little bit strange to a lot of people. Remember our first day there, one of the female students fainted too, because she saw all these strange chopped up bodies on the tables. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the study of anatomy, and later it probably became the reason that I would do manipulative therapy, I think. As I was saying, I certainly enjoyed the course. We had a very friendly group of tutors, I think, perhaps apart from Miss Gotts, who was a little bit distant usually. Enid Gotts was a physiotherapist from Britain who had done her Chartered Society training in Britain, and her teachers there too. And she came to us and took over from Miss Roberts, who had been the principal of the school for some time. Enid Gotts was specific and specialist in electrotherapy, and was a great teacher of that. It is said, and it's probably true, that she had taken an apprenticeship in electricity. Whether she was a trained wiresman or what, I don't really know, but she certainly had the skills and was effective with the use of electrotherapy. And as I say, it was her particular field, and I remember learning quite a lot of things from her. One of the earlier electrotherapy treatments that I did was on a patient with paronychia, and I didn't really think this would work, this ionisation thing, but it did work, and it worked so well and so rapidly. In a matter of 3 weeks or something, a condition of paronychia, the inflammation of the nail beds of the fingers, had recovered completely. And I was absolutely sold on this particular line as a young student, but it was years before I ever put that one into practice, and I only ever treated one patient, but it worked equally as well at that particular time too. Miss Gotts was an authoritarian in so many ways. She was pretty able as a teacher and taught positively and taught well. That couldn't be said for all teachers that we'd had, but she was a typical teacher in that she could introduce the subject properly, teach it thoroughly and revise it well. So we did learn from her and learned easily. The vice principal of the school at that time was Beryl Service, and Beryl's particular field was PT side of the thing, the physical exercise side, the exercise programs that she taught and demonstrated and demanded from us were good quality, good level. She was a very friendly person, a tutor that you could talk to, and she would answer and discuss as much as you wanted to hear from her. As a physiotherapist, she was a very positive one also, with a great approach to patients. The school was a pretty wonderful place, well equipped with the sort of equipment that you would expect in a physio school. It was there. I remember going to Australia to a conference of principals of the physiotherapy schools of Australia, and at one particular discussion period we discussed the equipment that was possessed by schools, and we in New Zealand, in our school, was equipped, I would have thought, better than any of the Australian schools. If the question was, what do you have in the way of microwave, you could rattle off the situation as it was in our school, and no other school had quite the same support and equipment. I was impressed with that, and at that stage, years after my first year at the school, obviously, I became aware that we did have a wonderful place there. The fact of a proper sized swimming pool, which is still used extensively today, a reasonably large training pool which was used with patients that required hydrotherapy treatment, and very particularly it was extensively used during the polio epidemics. I remember several of those, the last 3 or so, that were problems in Otago and in parts of New Zealand too. We were able to give the best treatment there, and they were extensively used, these pools. We had a hydrotherapy department too, which my father was housed there really, because at that stage hydrotherapy was not extensively used, but it was there and it was used on occasion. And we had the material that would have come from the ideas of the Northern Hemisphere physiotherapy inputs, particularly from the Scandinavian ones. And the material, the equipment there was excellent.